The red spot. Ruth Steinberg overheard the gossip and wanted to scream. It wouldn't have been her first scream that week, and given the throbbing pain in the left half of her face, it likely wouldn't be her last. She turned in her chair, purposefully aiming her right side, her good side, at the chatty actresses across the dressing room, and glared at them. They abruptly stopped gossiping and averted their eyes, going back to applying makeup and costumes. Ruth's painted lips pursed in satisfaction. It was the closest she could get to making a smile with the current tautness of her skin. But looking back at the lit vanity mirror in front of her, Ruth's grin faded, because the reflection showed both Ruth's good side and her bad side. Not that Ruth had a bad side, not normally anyway. Of course, Ruth would be the first to tell her many friends that she was far from perfect. For one thing, she had an annoying little brother, Chuck, and for another, Ruth had to work at least twice as hard as the other talented performers in Bye Bye Birdie to memorize her lines and be the absolute best actress on the stage. Yes, the truth was, it wasn't easy being Ruth Steinberg, and it wasn't even her fault. She was born this way. Ruth was born pretty.
Did you see it? What's on her face?
Ruth heard her co-stars whispering about her again. Despite herself, she shrunk down in her chair. The bulbs around the vanity mirror cast her left cheek in stark relief, even though she had unpinned her blonde hair in an attempt to cover it. Ruth felt her blood start to simmer. So what? So what if the other girls had nothing better to do than fixate on her? So what if Ruth had a blemish on her face? It was just a pimple. It was just a red spot.
She's not actually going out on stage, is she? Disgusting.
Ruth ignored the hushed, tittering voices in the dressing room and applied more concealer to her cheek. Of course, the other girls wouldn't understand. And for once, Ruth almost envied them. Why, some days, Ruth almost wished that she were like those other girls, that she wasn't so good-looking. She occasionally wondered what it would feel like to be free of that burden and trade places with one of the ordinary, unremarkable students in her school. Like Chuck's little friend Stella, there was a plain Jane if Ruth ever saw one. Then again, Ruth felt that she also had a responsibility to the good people of Mill Valley to use her looks in a positive way. It'd be a sin to not take advantage of a God-given gift, right? So when all the boys would follow Ruth and buy her malts at the drugstore and give her their Letterman jackets when she got cold, Ruth gladly accepted their attentions. She even accepted the attentions of a few of the ladies around her, although those stares were of a different sort. Long before Ruth turned 17, she became aware of the jealousy directed at her. Even grown women seemed to resent Ruth's beauty. Well, not Ruth's mom. Mrs. Steinberg hardly ever commented on her daughter's appearance. She was always too busy fawning over Chuck, making him snacks and sewing stupid Halloween costumes for him. Ruth didn't get any help with her wardrobe for Bye Bye Birdie, naturally, and had to make it herself. Thank you very much. But she didn't care about that, just like she didn't care about the envious scowls she received on a daily basis. Take the mother of Chuck's other little friend, Augie, for example. Ruth would feel Mrs. Hildebrand's eyes on her whenever the middle-aged woman dropped her son off at Mill Valley High. And each and every time, Ruth knew exactly what Mrs. Hildebrand was thinking. I used to look that way. I used to be young. I used to be beautiful. But Ruth never let on that she knew what she knew. Why should she? It wasn't her fault. She was born this way. Ruth was born pretty. She was going to live pretty, and by God, if Ruth had anything to say about it, she was going to die pretty too, with a little help from Avon, some Aquanet, and a whole lot of positive thinking. Mrs. Steinberg once told her daughter, this was before Chuck came along, obviously, something she'd read in a self-help book. According to this book, successful people envision their accomplishments before they happen. They form a picture in their heads of what they want, and poof, they will it into being. Ruth shut her eyes in the dressing room and imagined the ovation she'd receive after her star-making turn in the school play. It was going to be a standing ovation, actually. Everyone would be cheering and clapping, and Tommy would walk over from the wings with a gorgeous bouquet of lilies and, well, no, not Tommy, because he had just gone missing, and good riddance to that creep. But some other cute guy would fight off the rest to give Ruth her flowers and then take her to dinner. Like actually take her to dinner instead of just saying he was going to take her to dinner and then driving them to the makeout section of the drive-in instead. And at this dinner, Ruth could order anything she wanted, even the lobster because he would insist. And people would keep coming up to Ruth and her new beau, and they'd apologize for interrupting, but they just had to say something to Ruth. They had to tell her how fabulous she looked on stage. Sure, but also how much her performance had moved them. With a contented sigh, Ruth opened her eyes. She finished dusting her cheek with powder and appraised her reflection once more. There, no one in the audience would be able to tell Ruth had a zit. Another actress sat beside Ruth, looked into their shared mirror, and flinched. She pointed at the red spot and said, "Oh, honey, you need to do something about that." The girls around them didn't even bother to cover their smirks or giggles. Ruth felt the boil on her cheek pulsate even harder. Seething with anger and unaccustomed to the strange sense of humiliation, she pushed past her fellow actresses, supporting players really. Ruth went to the restroom. Her heels clicked a strident beat down the school's hallway. She passed a banner that read, "Mill Valley High proudly presents Bye Bye Birdie, November 2nd to 8th, and resisted the impulse to snatch it down and tear it apart with her bare hands. But that would ruin Ruth's manicure, and she was not about to do that. Ruth already had to cake a ton of foundation on her face and undo her normal bouffant to veil that red spot. Enough was enough already. She opened the ladies' room door and found a bunch of loud girls inside. They instantly stopped chattering and gaped back at Ruth's face with wide, disbelieving eyes. Ruth spun around and marched off toward another restroom. As she went, she caught snippets of the girls' remarks through the closing bathroom door. "Gross. What's with the fright makeup? Doesn't she know Halloween's over?" Halloween. That's when all of this trouble started for Ruth in the first place. As she rushed up a staircase, she thought back to 2 nights prior. Tommy Milner had offered to buy her dinner. Surprise, surprise. Ruth had her doubts about his true intentions by then. But what else was she supposed to do? Go out trick-or-treating with Chuck and his nerdy friends? That was baby stuff. Besides, chocolate made Ruth's skin break out. But the night went off course sooner than expected when Tommy decided to steal candy from kids instead. Ruth hinted that Tommy should stop, but he was already drunk, and honestly, Tommy looked positively handsome when he acted mischievously. So Tommy and his pals had their fun, and Ruth was about to get her long-awaited dinner when none other than Chuck lit a brown paper bag on fire and tossed it into Tommy's Pontiac. Ruth had seen her little brother angling in their toilet with a fishnet, so she already knew what was inside the bag before Tommy accidentally smeared it all over himself. Seeing another perfectly good evening dash, Ruth was ready to call it quits. Only Tommy got that wild look in his eye. He could be a mean drunk. She had seen how he treated that pathetic scarecrow on his family's farm. So her irritation turned to concern when she realized Tommy wanted to treat her kid brother the same way. Reaching the top of the steps, Ruth hurried down the corridor to the school's second-floor restrooms, the blister on her cheek stinging worse than before. Her pink stage costume swished back and forth as she went, and Ruth suddenly became concerned with the time. She spotted a clock on the wall above a bank of lockers. 10 minutes until curtains up. Plenty of time to do what needed to be done. Just like Ruth did what needed to be done on Halloween. She had pleaded Tommy to let bygones be bygones, but he was far past listening. He dragged Ruth with him all the way to that filthy Bellows place at the edge of town. Ruth never liked to frown. It causes lines around the eyes and mouth. But when Tommy trapped Chuck and his friends in the cellar, she had to put her foot down. And what did Ruth get for standing up for others? Tommy shoved her into the basement with the rest. He even called her trash before locking the door on the lot of them. Trash? Ruth knew who the real trash was, and it was Tommy Milner. She supposed the fashionable thing to do was to feign worry, now that Tommy was missing. But he didn't deserve her worry. The same as how he didn't deserve her. He probably wasn't even missing. Chief Turner should have started by checking all the bars in Mill Valley. Ruth's staccato footsteps echoed along the hallway until she reached the second-story ladies' room. Shutting her eyes, she imagined it was empty and opened the door. Poof! A vacant bathroom awaited Ruth. She hummed in sing-song approval and went to the mirror. Ruth gasped. The red spot, little more than a bump mere moments ago, had ballooned into an enormous welt. Its base flared red, while the tight skin along the mound looked white and shiny. The clogged pore had gotten so large and infected, it made Ruth's entire face seem lopsided. She couldn't even open her left eye as wide as the right, because her cheek pushed up against her lower lid. There was no imagining this away, Ruth realized. She touched the boil and winced in pain. Ruth then turned on the hot water faucet and hoped the steam would loosen the obstruction. As she bent over to dab some warm water onto her face, she almost thought she saw a shadow shift in the mirror, but that was probably just the glass fogging over. Standing upright again, Ruth braced herself against the basin. She was about to rub the condensation off the mirror when she heard a whisper, this one lower and raspier than that of the other girls. Ruth slowly turned around. Maybe the bathroom wasn't quite as empty as she had believed, but a quick peek under all the stall doors confirmed Ruth was alone in there. That faint voice must have been a figment of her powerful imagination. As loath as Ruth was to admit it, people's whispers did affect her. They lingered and they hurt her feelings, especially when they were true. Her hands squeaked against the mirror as she finally wiped the film of steam off of it. On the other side of the glass, another woman's disfigured reflection stared back at Ruth. Ruth screamed in horror. She twirled around again, expecting that ghastly figure to be standing right behind her, but no one was there. After several seconds of not breathing, Ruth felt her heartbeat again. Blood coursed through her veins, palpating that adherent pimple with a steady rhythm. It had to be the stress cracking Ruth up, turning her imagination against her, and ruining her normally pristine complexion. She remembered reading in another one of her mother's self-help books. Mrs. Steinberg would have been too busy fussing over Chuck at this point to dote on her daughter. How stress could take a toll on one's body and mind. Anyone could see that the stress of Halloween night had triggered Ruth's breakout, and the stress of memorizing all those lines, basically carrying the entire production of Bye Bye Birdie all by herself, only compounded that blemish. It made her see things that weren't there. But there was one thing that really was there. One thing that was the source of all of Ruth Steinberg's recent woes. The zit had to go. Ruth leaned closer to the mirror, its surface no longer fogged, and eyed the lump on her cheek. She could almost see it thrum in time with her pulse. She could almost see something wriggle just beneath the stretched surface. With her gaze so focused on her blighted visage, Ruth failed to notice the shadows around her start to move. They too wriggled, like the matching arms of some half-dead bug. The shadows spread in tandem, unfurling up the walls and across the ceiling. The dark lines intersected and wove together into a black web. But Ruth just couldn't pull her eyes away from the growth on her face. The shadows dripped back down the walls, and again, something moved beneath her skin. Ruth clenched her jaws in agony, and the strain forced a short, ingrown hair to poke out of the pimple. Ruth whimpered. How could her body, which everyone loved by the way, produce something so unbelievably unsightly? What had Ruth ever done to deserve such embarrassment, and on opening night no less? Hadn't she always been generous to her followers? Hadn't she always acted the model citizen in quaint Mill Valley? Ruth was going to put this podunk town on the map, just as soon as she got discovered in Hollywood. Just as soon as she stole the show in Bye Bye Birdie. Just as soon as she popped this goddamn zit. Ruth tugged on the freed hair, but it didn't budge. Gritting her teeth for the sting to come, she reached for the coarse whisker again. But before Ruth could touch it, the hair twitched like it was alive. Stifling another whimper, Ruth leaned even closer to the mirror. She scrutinized the ingrown hair and now saw that it wasn't a hair at all. It was a little leg. It bent at the joint, and again Ruth screamed. She cupped her hands over the enlarging red spot and felt something spilling against her trembling fingers. Ruth assumed the bump had ruptured and that she'd now have to clean up the pus that wept into her palms, and fast. Before her first number started, maybe she could run down to the girls' locker room and find some toothpaste. That was supposed to help with acne, wasn't it? Ruth visualized her action plan in her head. She was going to do this. She was going to make her cue and dazzle all those jealous jerks in the cheap seats. She was going to ignore the weird tickling sensation under her hands. Ruth's body went limp with dread. Her fingers couldn't so much as make a fist. They parted, and from the spaces between them, dozens of baby spiders escaped across Ruth's face. She screamed louder than she ever had in any audition. She pulled her hands away. An endless stream of arachnids spread from the punctured flap of skin that used to be her cheek. An animal panic overcame Ruth. She clawed at the hatching spiders, scoring her flesh with her polished nails and drawing even more blood. But her spastic swatting only seemed to hasten the arrival of more of them. The skein of shadows around Ruth constricted until the only light in Mill Valley High's second-story girls' room went out. Ruth didn't scream this time so much as wail in raw, abject terror. She felt the last of the air leave her lungs and perceived a new darkness stitch itself together over her eyes. It was blacker than the shadows that befell her. Ruth backed into the corner and dropped to her knees, skinning them and ripping the hem of her dress. Her dress that she made because no one else wanted to, not even her own mother. With a racking sob, Ruth curled into the fetal position. She writhed and shrieked in the corner, more and more spiders coating her body in a blanket equal parts liquid and abrasive. Was this what Tommy wanted when he hurled Ruth into that bug-infested cellar? Was this what all the other girls wanted to see? Ruth Steinberg profaned and suffering on the ground? Oh, that was always the way, wasn't it? People love to put someone special on a pedestal before shoving them back down to the dirt, especially the hillbillies in Mill Valley, especially Chuck. That little bastard would be laughing about this forever, and Mrs. Steinberg would never tell him to stop. Not her little boy, not the apple of her eye, not her favorite child. Ruth suddenly felt a sudsy splash against her head, eyes no longer blindfolded by thousands of pinching legs. She looked up and saw who soaked her. It was Chuck. He dropped the janitor's mop bucket and ran to his sister's side. Behind him, Chuck's friend Stella stood paralyzed in shock, while some other boy doffed his leather jacket and slapped it against the fleeing spiders. Ruth was vaguely aware that Chuck was saying something to her, even as light returned to the bathroom. In the buzzing glow of the fluorescent bulbs, Ruth saw a crowd of rubberneckers at the open restroom door, and countless spider bites along every square inch of her exposed flesh, a constellation of inflamed little red spots. "It's okay. You're going to be okay," Ruth heard Chuck say. Her eyes fluttered, and her numb hands swiped at the spiders that were no longer on her face. With a distant and confused gaze, she said, "She was here! I saw her! The light! Crawling! The spiders! They're all over me!" "They're all gone now, Ruthie," Chuck said to her as if she were the younger sibling, not him. "They're all gone." But what the hell did he know? Stupid kid. Ruth could feel them. She could still feel them, even if others couldn't see them. They were skittering over and under her skin. "All over me! My face!" Ruth began before becoming more agitated. "Look at me! They came from inside of me! Out of my face! It was my scent!" Chuck, Stella, the cute guy with the leather jacket, and the growing crowd of onlookers all stared at Ruth, not in awe of her beauty, but out of pity for what the spiders had exposed. Between her tears and the scratches on her corneas, Ruth broke down crying. She looked past the gathered crowd to the clock on the wall behind them, above a bank of lockers. It was late. Bye Bye Birdie had already begun, and Ruth had missed her big entrance. The paramedics had to strap Ruth's hands to the gurney to keep her from clawing at herself. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she saw her parents watching tearfully from outside Mill Valley High, their grief apparent in the flashing red and white lights. Ruth's mom was looking at her, and her alone, not at Chuck. A deranged smile spread across Ruth's bloody, bitten lips. It felt good to smile, especially with that engorged mass now deflated on her cheek. That smile became a laugh, and that laugh became a throaty cackle that pierced louder than the ambulance's siren as it drove away. The girls in the Mill Valley High Drama Club would be gossiping about that cackle for generations. Ruth Steinberg was finally famous for more than her looks. But it wasn't Ruth's fault. She was born that way. She was born pretty.